You know, the bummer in reviewing something like Firefly is the possibility that I might not completely and totally convey how necessary it is for you to watch this show. Other than that, pretty excited to talk about it, so shiny. Let's review Firefly, finally. Firefly. So Firefly was created by Joss Whedon over 10 years ago. It aired on Fox and it was shortly canceled. For all intents and purposes, it was dead on arrival. And I will talk about all of that in more detail, but for right now, let's illustrate what Firefly is. Firefly takes place 500 years in the future, but it's not a sci-fi, it's a Western. And in the future, you have the Alliance, which is pretty much the government of America and China have fused together to form the super government, the Alliance. The current solar system that you and I live in right now is all burned out. Earth is just, it can't sustain our numbers. So everyone migrated to another solar system with dozens of planets and hundreds of moons, and they were all terraformed. And the inner planets are all civilized and high-tech, and the Alliance really controls those. But then you have the outer rim planets and moons, which more or less the show revolves around. They look and feel more Western. And with the expansion of this government, they were like, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and control everything. The outer rim planets are like, we don't want your control. So now we have a civil war. The main star of the show, Firefly, Malcolm Reynolds, played by Nathan Fillion, fought in that war. And in a bizarre turn of events, you know how usually in things like this, it's like, oh, they fought in the rebellion and the rebellion won. Not this time, the rebellion got stomped. Malcolm Reynolds and the other Browncoats fighting for independence lost the war, thus the Alliance maintains control of all the planets. A few years later, we now have the show Firefly, in which Malcolm Reynolds is like, I have my ship Serenity, which is a Firefly class ship. He's a smuggler, he does runs, he does transport. Along with the greatest ensemble crew put together this side of Final Fantasy VI, we now have our show Firefly. Now when I say this show is a Western, I really mean it. It does not feel like a sci-fi. Everything about it should on paper, you're like, oh, it's a guy, flies around in a spaceship at another solar system. He's a smuggler like Han Solo on the Millennium Falcon, and he has his crew. And the planetary government's going after him, and it sounds sci-fi, but it's not. It's the most realistically feeling and grounded show that's ever taken place in the future. Imagine in the 50s, they made a show where they had smartphones and tablets and computers, digital cameras that would seem like sci-fi. It's just an accurate representation of what the future would be. That's what Firefly feels like. It just feels like a very realistic take of what probably will be 500 years from now. I mean, I like Star Trek, but I don't think the future's actually going to be like Star Trek. But if I had to put my chips on it, I'd be like, Firefly is a pretty good bet. Another thing I love about the show, there are no aliens. There are just a lot of people spread across a lot of planets and moons because there are a lot of people now. That's all you deal with are people. The most alien thing in the entire show are these things called Reavers, which you don't actually see in the show Firefly. You run across the aftermath of a Reaver attack and you run across a Reaver ship in the show. You don't know where they come from, you don't know who they are, but you do know that they're ravenously violent cannibal people. It's like, imagine the zombies in Dawn of the Dead had the wits about them to run a ship and they rape you to death and wear your skin as trophies. Those are Reavers, I guess. But again, nothing says that they're aliens. And you don't know where they come from yet. In the show being created to look and feel like a Western, they used lenses that give lens flares, like not J.J. Abrams lens flares, but you know, subtle lens flares. And there's a lot of zooming going on. When something zooms, it's out of focus for a second, it goes into focus. You see that a lot of times in Westerns, but nowadays you're like, oh, that's just cheesy. But the cheesy factor actually works for the show. When you have a cult hit with cheese factor, dude, you have gold. Not that they knew it was going to be a cult hit, but it is a cult hit. Another thing that adds to the realism of the show and makes it feel like a Western more than a sci-fi is the fact that not only do they use horses, which they do, they also use powder weapons, guns, bullets, no lasers. Lasers do exist in this world, but they exist in the core planets, but you don't really see a lot of them. Common people, which is 99% of the people in this verse, they use powdered weapons. It's kind of like concept cars. Concept cars like this, they exist in our world today. For all intents and purposes, people don't drive those. Laser technology does exist, but it's not what common folks use. You see like 2 laser guns in the entire show. Just everything in the show Firefly worked perfectly. Just very few times I'll ever say that this was flawless, but Firefly was flawless. We'll take the crew. I'm gonna break the crew down for you. First of all, Malcolm Reynolds. Played by Nathan Fillion, the guy is a nerd icon. If you have a nerdy bone in your body, you know who Nathan Fillion is. In short, he is the man. This is the classic case of the character was written one way, but the actor actually brought enough of him into the character to make him a complete person. The character of Malcolm Reynolds was written to be really bitter and damaged, and he does have those things going for him. He lost a war to the government government. And in a world where people love damaged characters, Malcolm Reynolds has lost all hope. In the Battle of Serenity Valley at the very beginning of the show, you see Malcolm Reynolds pull out a cross and he kisses it and puts it under his shirt and he goes to war. And then they lose. Now, a few years later, the guy has lost all of his faith. He's just damaged. He's like, nope, no God, just my ship, and let's go about our business. He has no need to fight the war. He doesn't want to fight the Alliance. He just wants to go his way. What Nathan Fillion brought to the character of Malcolm Reynolds was a likability. His sense of humor, his sarcasm, his humanity. If anyone else had played Malcolm Reynolds, I really don't think it would have worked out how it worked out. Malcolm Reynolds would have been this closed-off character with his walls up. But in Nathan Fillion bringing a sense of humor and a warmth to him, he always told Joss Whedon, he's like, I am not this person. I'm not that bitter. He turned him into a character who has his walls up and his bitterness because he does have a heart of gold underneath. A heart of gold that was crushed and stomped out by his crushing defeat on the Battle of Serenity Valley at the hands of the government. Malcolm Reynolds is pretty much, imagine Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series, but he lost a war. So now he's just a little more bitter. And in going his way, he is a smuggler. I can't illustrate the whole Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon vibe enough. Malcolm Reynolds' second in command is Zoe. Zoe was one of his war buddies. She's a complete badass. What I love about her and Mal, they both would shoot first. Greedo would stand no chance. Their sarcasm bounces off each other, so they work well together. I guess Zoe was created as a failsafe. They were like, all right, if Nathan Fillion doesn't work for the show, we need to know that the second in command can step up and actually lead the show. I don't know how we live in a world where it was ever a thought that Nathan Fillion and Malcolm Reynolds, that whole thing wouldn't work. But, you know, you gotta have your contingency plan. They never had to go through with it, but Zoe is a badass. She is married to Wash, the pilot. Wash is more or less the comic relief. In a show like Firefly that is written so perfectly among all these characters where their dialogue bounces off of each other brilliantly in ingenious form, you could say that everybody is the comic relief because everybody has comedic moments without the show being a comedy and remaining a drama. But Wash is the comic relief. He's the exact opposite of Zoe. Zoe's a warrior. He is not. He's funny. She's not a comedian. He never fought in the war. He doesn't want to fight a war, but he's a badass pilot. Then we got Shepherd Book. Shepherd Book is the preacher on the ship. At first, Mal's like, really? But he rolls with it. You can tell they mutually respect each other. He's like the Jiminy Cricket, the conscience. They're all smugglers. They're doing their smuggler thing, and you have a preacher on board. He is going to be the voice of reason, but that dude has a secret. I mean, naturally, Shepherd Book wasn't always a shepherd. He wasn't always a preacher. More than a couple times, you get the feeling this guy was tied to the Alliance somehow, and this guy knows a lot about their operation. How deep does that go? Oh, I guess we'll find out, because the show won't get canceled. Oh, wait, it did. I guess they explained Shepherd Book's story in a graphic novel, but I wanted to see it on screen. Whatever the case, I love characters like Shepherd Book. I love characters with a secret. And I guess a little side note here, the plan was for everyone to have a secret. If the show had gone on, everyone would have a secret that would come to the surface. But hey, the show got canceled, so we didn't know that. Then we have Jane. Jane is the merc. He is the mercenary. You pay the guy will do anything. The other guy pays the guy more than you paid him, he will probably do anything the other guy wants. Which doesn't really bode well for you. First run through of the show, Jane was like my least favorite character because I was like, all right, you're just a mercenary. How deep can they be? When you watch the show a couple times, you're like, nah, Jane's amazing. And he has Vera. Hey, everyone has something they love. Mal has his ship. He named it Serenity. Jane can have his gun, Vera. Then we have the companion, Inara. Now, this is when we start to see the culture of the future. Inara is actually the credible person on the crew. She has an ambassador status. People are like, oh, you have a companion on board? You are a legit transport. You're not smugglers. What's a companion? Well, she's a whore. Registered by the guild and everything. That's right. Prostitution is legal in the future. Which is probably why we all love Firefly. She has her tension with Mal. You can tell they have a thing between each other, but of course they don't act on it because they're both stubborn people, and the show was canceled. I can't say that enough. I can't stress that enough as a negative. Which brings us to Kaylee. Now, Kaylee's the engineer. She's like the genius engineer of Serenity. A Firefly class ship, which is what Serenity is not the most prestigious class. Smugglers love them because they're good at smuggling things, but really it's a piece of shit. She keeps the thing flying. She knows how to work out all the kinks, and what's funny about this, Jewel State was told that she would have to gain 20 pounds to play Kaylee, because Joss Whedon wanted people who were real. It's like, we can't have everyone look like models. We already have Inara. The engineer's not gonna look all just hotted out. I have to stress, she's still hot, but in that, you know, cute hot chick kind of way. And now we have the Tams. Simon Tam is a doctor, really prestigious doctor, who brings a crate of cargo on board. You don't really know what it is. You find out it's his sister, River. This guy has given up his entire fortune to find his sister because his sister was being held in a facility of the government. You don't really specifically know what the Alliance did to River's brain. All you know is they messed her up. Now, Now the Alliance is coming after her with a vengeance. Simon and River are wanted people. Now they're on Mal's ship, and Mal's like, great, really? You brought your drama into my home. Which also shows the depth of Mal's character, because as much as he wants to come across as hardened and damaged and doesn't care about people, he doesn't leave them. He doesn't drop them off on a port or anything like that. He wants to on more than a couple of occasions, but he doesn't. But River's the key to the entire show. As much as the show revolves around the entire crew and everyone is relevant, you get the feeling that River is the key piece to the entire puzzle. If they solve her problem, that would be like beating the last boss of a game. The game is over because you win. But her brain's all messed up and she speaks in riddles and doesn't really understand what's going on. But you can tell she's self-aware of the fact that she's messed up. Like there's this one awesome scene in this one episode where she's going around and she finds a stick on the ground and she picks up the stick and she's just looking at it. And to her, it's just a stick. And then it goes to what everyone else sees and they're all like, River, put it down, put it down. It goes to her again and she's holding a gun and you can tell she's just confused. Even the supporting characters within episodes are great. You have Saffron and Armistice Reynolds, which again, that episode is one of those episodes that illustrates that the show is a drama which can be funny, but not funny in that slapstick kind of way. It's just funny and good comedic timing. And Saffron's played by Christina Hendricks. And that's just not a bad world we live in. However, when the show wants to be creepy and uncomfortable, it is creepy and uncomfortable. Can you think of a more uncomfortable conversation than the conversation that takes place in Firefly between Early and Kaylee? No, you cannot. Neither can I. Early's a bounty hunter who shows up in one of the episodes, obviously contracted by the Alliance, to find River Tam and bring her back to them. He's talking to Kaylee in mid-sentence. He just interrupts Kaylee and he's like, "Ever been raped?" And you're like, why, dude? And of course, you gotta talk about the soundtrack and the musical score. The music in Firefly is fantastic. It's Western twang, but you hear Asian inspiration in there also. It's like a bunch of cultures just went splat and made a soundtrack that works. It's just so unique and genius. It changes how you hear Western twang in music. You hear it, you're like, oh yeah, it reminds me of Firefly now. There's this one scene where there's a funeral, and I guess the composer of the show, they had all learned that the show was getting canceled at that time. So the music he wrote for the funeral scene is actually his lament for the show. And you watch it and you hear it and it just makes you cry. And the title music, I mean, you listen to the lyrics, take my love, take my land, take me where I cannot stand. I don't care, I'm still free, you can't take the sky from me. It just goes on from there and you're like, that's Malcolm Reynolds. The intro song itself perfectly illustrates where Malcolm Reynolds is coming from. I got the soundtrack, I listen to it, and I'm always happy when I do. I can go on and on about the dialogue and how it works well and how characters bounce off of each other and it's all perfection, but what gives it the extra mile, what makes it feel real and enjoyable to watch, is the fact that the actors work well together. You know when you have a couple of actors, they don't like each other and that translates on screen, it makes it uncomfortable to watch? Well, then the opposite also applies. When you have actors that all love each other and feel like a family, when you watch that, that will come through and it'll be enjoyable to watch. That's what Firefly was. Everyone on this show just loved each other. Nobody ever went to work. No one on the production of this show ever thought to themselves, oh, I gotta go to work today. They all went to a set and they all hung out as a family. That really translates on screen big time. It's easy to see. It's right in front of your face. And by that, what Fox did was they did not just cancel a show, they broke up a family. There's no other way to say it than that. This is 14 episodes of fantastic entertainment. When I watch the show, I'm always like, okay, what's the episode that I would cut? You know, you're looking for that episode, you're like, that's the episodic episode, and I can't ever find it. If I can think of one, it's the Janetown one, the one where they go to this mud town. It's just this piece of shit town, but everyone there thinks Jane is a folk hero. In watching it, I'm always like, okay, this is enjoyable, but if this episode was not in the show, would it be affected? I'm always like, probably not. Then by the end of that episode, I'm like, nope, that's important character development for Jane. We need that episode in this show. Firefly blends the best elements of character development, drama, comedic timing, relevance, relatability, just everything is in this 14 episode package that never should have been canceled, and we will never know why. We'll never know why it was canceled. I have no good reason. Everything about Firefly is definitively awesome-tacular. It's the very definition of awesome-tacular, if ever there was one. The show was dead on arrival from the get-go, though. Honestly, Fox was like, well, we don't like the pilot episode because it's a 2-hour drama, which absolutely establishes the characters and what they're fighting for. But no, air the second episode first. And after that, we'll just air it all out of order, and 3 episodes won't actually ever air, and then it's canceled because it was on Friday night. Who? Why? It's just injustice is what it is. You can tell Joss Whedon was like, for all intents and purposes, this would be my masterpiece. And usually when someone makes their masterpiece, it's like, oh, that person has a shot and the masterpiece flourishes because they did it at the time that they could do it. They were biding their time, they got their budget, now they have the production, now they can do their masterpiece. Joss Whedon did that and was like, oh, hey, your masterpiece is cut off. I have never, ever, ever seen any form of entertainment that has characters that work this well together, that are this likable, with a main character who's just everything you wanted to be as a kid, embarking on his quest for what he has to look forward to now, which is his love story between him and his ship, as every pirate has said, is freedom. It's all gold, and it was cut down before its time. If you haven't seen Firefly, you can buy the entire series on Blu-ray for less than 20 bucks. I strongly urge you to do that. Watch the show. After that, you'll end up watching the movie Serenity. He did get a shot to conclude his story in the form of the movie Serenity. That wraps up the Firefly story. But that is a different review for another time. I will review Serenity separately from this video. Personally, what I would love to see, all right, let's look at it realistically. The cast of Firefly, they're older now. They're 10 years older. They look it. So it'd be really hard to return to the world of Firefly. You want Nathan Fillion to be Malcolm Reynolds, Jewel Staite to be Kaylee, Alan Tudyk to be Wash, etc, etc. But what I think would be a smart thing to do is to get Telltale Games, the one who made the Walking Dead video game that was so awesome, get them to do chapters of Firefly. Can you imagine that? 5 chapters all released like The Walking Dead was? New dialogue, new adventures, have the actors play the voices of their characters? We could have the continuing chapters of Firefly, it'd be badass! Well, that's just in my hopeful world of something that might not ever happen, but I think should. So if you've seen Firefly, if you haven't, watch it, and then come back to answer the question, what is your favorite episode of Firefly? Whatever it is, comment below, let me know. My favorite episode's probably Out of Gas. It had the suspense, it had the drama, it had the backstory. I like the way it's edited, just everything worked in that episode. It shows how the crew became the crew. I'm glad we got to see that before the show got the axe. I could honestly watch Out of Gas every day of my life. I could watch it. Next time someone stops me in the streets in Vegas and is like, do you go to church? I'll be like, well, I watched Out of Gas today, so yes. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.